From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, and what a day it is. Happy Independence Day to everybody in America and happy Election Day here in the UK. I can tell you it's guaranteed to be fireworks on both sides of the Atlantic. And also here on the Muckrakers, what we always do, we pledge to shine more light and less heat on the subjects that really matter to you. And today I thought, being American Independence Day, we should have a look at what on earth is going on in the States. And what is the state of poor old Joe Biden? Well, we're going to find that all out today in today's programme. And to help me do that, I'm joined by Taylor Hudak and also Basil Valentine. Welcome back to you both.
Great to be with you, Andrew.
It's great to be here.
It's lovely.
Viewers and listeners all around the world.
It's an absolute thrill. So in February, this is what happened. President Biden's doctor, he released a summary of President Biden's health, and he said basically he continues to be fit for duty. Well, recent performances, including the extraordinary debate that he had with Donald Trump, would suggest otherwise. Taylor, you're half American, half Hungarian. What's your take on it?
Right. It is very interesting to now see the mainstream corporate media in the United States finally picking up on the fact that it appears President Joe Biden is not fit for office. Now, this is not a new phenomenon. He has been making so many verbal mistakes throughout his career, the past 4 years in particular, and while he was running for office in 2020. However, I think a lot of people just didn't notice it perhaps as much because remember, during 2020, President or then candidate Joe Biden was hiding away from the public because this was during the heat of the so-called COVID crisis. So he was able to stay away from the media. He was shielded and protected from the media, didn't have to answer as many questions as he does now. And people are able to see that he is just not able to answer the questions. He's not as sharp as he once was. But let's be honest, this was always the case. The media ignored it until now. And so it does raise questions as to what exactly does this mean for the future of this upcoming election, which is just right around the corner. So it seems that he could potentially be replaced by somebody else within the Democratic Party. Of course, we can discuss that shortly here about who could possibly replace Joe Biden in this election. We're seeing some mixed messages now from Democrats within the House and various politicians on the left as to whether or not they support Joe Biden moving forward with this election or if they think that he should step down. But it is very interesting to see the media in unison on this issue when they previously had been very critical of anybody who rightly questioned, does Joe Biden have the cognitive capacity to hold one of the most powerful offices in the world?
Basil?
Well, you're back in February when he had this medical examination. They didn't do any cognitive tests on Joe Biden, believe it or not. And that is something that has irked, amongst others, James Comer, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, who's looking to subpoena White House physicians to find out why they passed this guy as 100% fit to carry on in office when every American citizen by now is well aware of the fact that he's not, that he is effectively a mumbling imbecile, that he's well on the way to total senility. Now, the fact that this has been self-evident to a lot of us for months, if not years, seems to be news to the media corporate elite and indeed to Democrats on Capitol Hill, who was shocked, oh my God, we didn't realize. Well, I mean, he was looking for a chair that wasn't there at D-Day. He's been spotted wandering off in various directions. He's held fewer press conferences than any other American president, generally refusing to take questions from multiple journalists. He reads everything off a teleprompter, and he's even stumbling over that these days. I mean, only 27% of people in a YouGov poll taken after the debate last week said that he had the mental capacity to continue as president. Rather alarmingly, 43% said they still vote for him. So there are a good number of people who think that he is mentally unfit to be president, but will still vote for him. So and that gives you some idea, perhaps, of the contempt in which some people hold Donald Trump, or perhaps that's indicative of those voters' own mental capacity, that they're willing to vote for somebody quite obviously incapable of doing the job. We'll come on to the rest of it, who might replace him yet. But at the moment, we're in a sort of irresistible force meets immovable object phase. Speaking to staffers on a call yesterday, Biden said, I'm in it to the end, we're going to win and all the rest of it. But the White House is rather like a sandcastle on the beach. Doesn't matter how much you dig a moat around it to try and keep out the waves, and Dad keeps piling more sand on top. The tide's coming in and it's going to wash it away.
No, some very interesting points. And there has been a different talk about immovable object. I mean, there's been a lot of footage about Biden freezing on stage, but there's also been, in amongst all of that, both deep fakes, which are being created with AI, and also what I call cheap fakes, which is basically where things have been edited. We've had a number of examples of that. I present a series called Andrew Eborn's Fake or Fact, and we've been looking at some of those. There was, for example, Biden went to Belfast, and there was a video that went viral with him pushing aside Rishi Sunak and basically shaking hands with somebody else. And it was under the thing that he didn't know who Rishi Sunak was and therefore ignored him. Well, I got hold of the original video, and actually he did greet Sunak appropriately and dealt with on that sort of basis. So that was a cheap fake, and it was edited to make him look bad. There was also the fundraiser, you'll remember, when he was with Obama on stage, and the headlines screamed around the world. He froze for 7 seconds and had to be dragged off stage by President Obama. Well, again, I went back to the original video and looked at the interview. I think it was with Jimmy Kimmel. And throughout the interview, he was lucid and dealt with the audience. And actually what he did, he waved to the audience at the end. He allowed them to take selfies. And in that glorious moment, like Michael Jackson used to do on stage, that bit of stillness to show power and authority, that's what he did for those 7 seconds. But again, the videos were edited. And I think it's very important to separate the two. His debate, however, was absolutely appalling. And what's interesting, it's in the press today. Meanwhile, in that other election, it says here, is what happens. Joe Biden's blamed his poor performance in last week's presidential debate on his jet lag over overseas trips, despite spending 6 days at Camp David preparing for the showdown. Speaking at a campaign event in Virginia last night, the US president admitted the debate against Republican Donald Trump did not go well. Well, that's an understatement. He said, I didn't have my best night, but the fact is I wasn't very smart, is what he said. He said he was very tired. He's traveled the world twice and he was exhausted. Do you buy that, Taylor?
No, I don't. I do not think that this is a case of a one-off. This wasn't one bad night, as many in the media are portraying this to be. This is a pattern of behavior in which the president of the United States is unable to answer questions and cannot speak in a coherent way.
Critically analyzing global affairs, the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm also joined by the wonderful Taylor Hudak, all the way over in Hungary, and Basil. I don't think you're still down in Brighton, aren't you, Basil?
Indeed I am, Andrew.
Very good. We've had an extraordinary time on the Muckrakers in the last week or so. You wanted to say something, Taylor, since you just joined us?
Yes. So first of all, I do want to point out, I do think it was mentioned at the beginning of the show that ironically today is, of course, 4th of July, Independence Day in the United States. Also, ironically, they're having a general election in the UK. And on our last show this week on Tuesday, when we were discussing the UK election, it was you, Andrew, that correctly predicted the headlines. STARMERGEDDON. It was in the UK media to reflect upon what is to take place in the UK with this general election. So good job on that. I know we're now about to head into some predictions ourselves about the US election and who could potentially replace Joe Biden.
You make some very interesting points. And I have to say, I mean, it's normal, isn't it, actually, you talk about PR, when you say, oh, somebody's got to step down and they're on the team, you all deny it. It's rather like, are you saying, are you going to stand in an election? We've had all sorts of people on this very programme say, oh, we're not going to stand, not going to stand, I'm not going to challenge anybody for the leadership. You always support the status quo. It is interesting. But thank you for your comments about predictions, because we do that very well on the Muckrakers. Not only did we predict STARMERGEDDON as the headline, but also we had Dr. David Bull on, who broke the news about Andrew Taylor and him being an actor and how he can put on these rough voices and so on and so forth, and the potential stitch-up of Nigel Farage on that sort of basis. So this is the programme. When people talk, they talk on the Muckrakers with Andrew Eborn. And what a joy. I want to talk about the American Constitution, though, before we look at replacements, because resting face, 25th Amendment, if you have a look at what he's got on that sort of thing. Talk to me, Basil, about the 25th Amendment and why it's relevant.
Oh, I don't know what the 25th Amendment is, Andrew. But what I can tell you is that whoever takes over from Joe Biden won't be able to use his campaign funds. So that's one reason why he may well end up standing, carrying on in the race. There's a few other points. First of which is that he's not currently, as of Thursday morning, under sufficient pressure to step down voluntarily. There's a few key events coming up. First of which is an interview with George Stephanopoulos of ABC. That will be aired tomorrow. It's only 15 minutes, but he needs to be at least coherent, if not razor sharp in that interview. And then he's got campaign stops in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin over the course of the weekend, where again, he needs to be very much on the ball. A couple of bad performances and will be in a very different place by the beginning of next week. At the moment, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and Barack Obama are all still behind him. Should they change, that will be a very different, will be in a completely different scenario. So there's that. Now, when it comes to his replacements, people are saying that Kamala Harris, or is it Kamala? Nobody seems to know, even her, is the automatic choice, not least because the Democrats are wedded to identity politics, and parachuting in a white man over a brown woman, even if he is a lot more competent, popular, and everything else, would be a terrible look for the party. The problem is that Harris herself is completely incompetent and very often incoherent. She might have 30 or 40 years on Joe Biden, but her IQ struggles to get into double figures. So, they don't have a ready-made replacement. They'd have to start all over again with the fundraising. It's extremely problematic to replace a candidate at this late stage. And as I say, at the moment, Biden shows no signs of going anywhere. In terms of alternative candidates, yes, there are the two that Taylor Hudak mentioned, but also, believe it or not, Michelle Obama. Now, talk about predictions. Our old friend Roger Stone, who I interviewed here on TNT a few months ago, reiterated his belief that Michelle Obama will be the nominee. And he's an insider in Washington and has been for many decades. And that was the word on the street. That's the word on the ground. Michelle Obama. And if you go to the betting sites, you'll find she's only an 8-to-1 chance. She's given about a 12% chance of winning. So of being the nominee is much higher chance than Gretchen Whitmer, for example, even though she's never held any public office before herself, only ever been the first lady. So that's a name in the hat. And then there are the other Democratic governors, people like Andy Bashar, J.B. Pritzker, and so on. There doesn't appear to be anyone from the Senate or from Congress who's being taken seriously at this stage.
I have to say, and having 100% record of getting these things right, Michelle Obama at those odds would be, it's worth putting a few bucks on that. Going back to the 25th Amendment, just so people understand it, do you understand this, Taylor, or shall I unpack it? 25th Amendment.
Well, I do want to bring up a few points. Very, very interesting what you say, Basil. I think people are also, when we're talking about who could replace Joe Biden, perhaps, I think people are also just motivated generally to vote for somebody who isn't Trump. Those who really fell for what many call the Trump derangement syndrome. I think they're just motivated to vote for anybody else other than Trump, which I think is also perhaps what could have led to Joe Biden becoming successful. Of course, there has been also a lot of evidence to suggest that election was manipulated, the last one. But I think that people were willing to vote for somebody who couldn't
arrest her. Election denial.
I know, right? It's right. But I think that it is fascinating to have discussions as to whether or not Michelle Obama would run. I personally do not understand why she would choose to do that. Think about the life that they have now. They're both, she and her husband, out of politics to re-enter into this space, into the political arena. It seems a little bit crazy to me, I will say, but I've seen that there has been some polling to suggest that she would be a very popular candidate and potentially able to beat Trump. So that will be very interesting to see. And as you said, Roger Stone has also predicted this, another former political insider. But yes, Andrew, brush us up on the 25th Amendment. Brush us up.
Let me tell you all about the 25th, because well done, both of you. So sitting back time, this is to do with the removal of a president. That's why people might start banding it around, because you need to look at this sort of side. 25th Amendment. So what happens is if somebody's unable to discharge their duties as president, they can effectively voluntarily offer up their sort of resignation, and then the vice president steps into their power, which means that you would automatically have Kamala on the ticket. They wouldn't lose money and so on and so forth, and it would work on that sort of basis. So expect that to be bandied around about the 25th Amendment, but that's what it's to do with, the removal of the president basically voluntarily. But it would need Biden to turn around and sort of say, hang about, I can't really do this anymore because I'm not quite fit enough at the moment, or I need a bit of time with my family. However he wants to phrase it, there is that sort of way out. I'm very interested to sort of look, however, more deeply into why he's being touted at this stage, because what I love about the Muckrakers is we unpack all these so-called conspiracy theories, and I always think it's a dismissive term because people always rubbish it. You only have to be right once when you have a theory, and that's what we try and do. All we care about here on the Muckrakers is the truth. So we need to get to the bottom of things. And one of the theories that I've seen is they've deliberately pushed Joe Biden to the forefront now so that Donald Trump doesn't have the advantage later on when debating him. So everybody realizes now that he's not really up to the job, and therefore they try and replace him now. What are your views on that, Basil?
Well, that's what Vivek Ramaswamy has been saying, the Republican candidate. He thinks that the Democrats are going to want to replace Biden as close to the election as possible so that the candidate then goes into the election in a so-called honeymoon period when automatically popular with the electorate and before they've come under too much scrutiny. So, yes, I mean, obviously that would be the inverse of what the Democrat strategists are supposed to have been doing by this, which is to dispel rumors of his senility. But then again, the people immediately around him must be aware, for all that they've been masquerading and lying to the American public about his state. You know, Dr. Jill, Biden's sister, they must know what a terrible condition he's in. So one starts to wonder, yes, perhaps other forces, as it were, because the other brings us on to the other question, Andrew, which we'll talk about after the break, which is who is actually running the United States. It obviously isn't that, barely mobile imbecile corpse. So who's running the United States right now is a very important question, which a lot of Americans want answered. And yes, maybe, this will be Trump's high watermark, as it were, in the polls, that, the contrast between the ailing Biden and then a fresh-faced candidate decades younger than Trump, as well as decades younger than Biden, whether it's Michelle Obama or somebody like that, who's able to sort of regalvanize the progressive base, it would be an interesting ploy. I mean, obviously, they'd have a much better chance of winning with such an individual than with this fossil.
No, you make a very interesting point. I mean, the last debate was so appalling. And I have to say that a personal point of view, because I speak to Biden directly, not too often, although he's very welcome on the show anytime to discuss his views. The reality is they must have known that he was not going to do a very good performance. Apart from going around the world twice and being jet lagged, and they said he had a cold and various other things, he had about 5 days to prepare at Camp David, and they would have known. And I think at the end of it, they had this mute button. The first time ever they had a mute button in the presidential debate, because the way that Trump normally debates is he talks over people and shuts them down and things like that. They thought they'd keep him quiet. He didn't need to be shut down this time. He just sort of does these extraordinary faces every time Joe made the most bizarre conversations. I mean, he might as well have taken Biden's car back to the White House there and then, you know. He sort of gave him the presidency in that moment. And they also had this strange debate about golf and various other things. It wasn't a very good debate, was it, Taylor?
No, I don't think it was. And it's interesting that you bring up the point about how they discussed things that seem to be irrelevant to the American people, like golf. They kind of argued with one another about their physical abilities, their mental fitness. But again, it does go back to a valid point, which is part of our discussion today, of course, which is the president's cognitive ability, which I don't think the White House has been fully transparent on by any means. And I think that at this stage, this is my personal view, Joe Biden should be enjoying his life. He is 81 years old, going to be 82 years old. If he does seek re-election and is elected for a second term, he will be 86, I believe, near the end of his second term. He should be spending these years of his life with his family and enjoying that time.
I've got to disagree with you there, Taylor. I think he should be spending the rest of his life in a jail cell for his complicity in genocide. But
I understand.
Going back to the golf question, hilariously, Donald Trump, who does make us laugh, if nothing else, a leaked video has come out of him talking about his rival, which he thought was in secret, and he referred to Biden as an old, broken down pile of crap who is about to quit the race. And he said, he just quit, he's quitting the race. I got him out, and that means we have Kamala. And about Kamala, he said, I think she's going to be better, but she's so bad. She's so pathetic. She's just so effing bad. So the Donald, honest as ever.
You say that was secretly recorded. I imagine that's deliberately recorded and put out appropriately. I always say that whatever you say, wherever you say it, it's going to get into the hands of those you least want it to. But that sounds like a deliberate ploy. You could hear Donald saying that publicly, couldn't you, Taylor?
Absolutely. And I do think that is part of his appeal to many people, is that he was open and honest. He spoke just like an average person, and people found that relatable. Whereas a lot of people also did not like that at all and found it unpresidential. And so I think that this was potentially the leaking of this video. I saw it as well. I think this was potentially to discredit the former president and to make him appear crass and all of those things. But I do think he seems to be up for a challenge. That's what I took away from his assertions in that video, that he's up for a challenge on this. So you do see two different dynamics at play here with regard to these two candidates. And I do think it will change dramatically if somebody younger, far more competent than Biden is to fulfill his place. And I do think that when there is a challenge when the candidates are challenged by one another, that's also better for the American people as well. Because then you are able to get into important discussions and people can hold each other accountable in a more fair way.
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. We need a vibrant, strong alternative in government. And that's always the concern about my phrase for which I always get royalties now, STARMERGEDDON, is that here we're basically, if you don't have a strong opposition, it's going to be a real problem. We're up against the break, however. When we do come back, we're going to be talking about who really is running USA. Do not go away.
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm joined today by Taylor Huddock and also Basil Valentine. And we've been discussing in depth the 25th Amendment and what it really means, because not many people knew that. And I can guarantee that it will be discussed a lot more in the media. What I was also saying is we were talking about Joe Biden's appalling performance. And some people blames it on a cold. He blames it on jet lag. Apparently, he's been taking this debate Viagra. He's been sort of injected. What do you know about, if anything, that, Taylor? Have you heard about that?
Well, I know that there's been speculation about him being on some form of medication, if that's what you're asking, when he is delivering public speeches. But he has historically been reading off of prompter. And so this was the first time in a while, I think, during the debate where he was unable to do so. And so that's why this upcoming interview with George Stephanopoulos, I believe it is either tomorrow, Friday, or on Saturday, is going to be, I think, quite important for the president. But yes, there were excuses that were made that he was unwell. There was a reporter who, Kelly O'Donnell, I think NBC correspondent, White House correspondent, stated, well, the president had a cold. Well, he should still be able to perform and be able to speak. Then, of course, there was also a discussion about how he was away in Europe, but that was 2 weeks prior to the date of this debate. So that's not it. This is not a one-off. This is a habitual pattern of this president. And I think that the reason why this president, Joe Biden in particular, is so appealing to those who really control the United States, which I know is a big upcoming discussion we have here. The reason why he is so appealing is because he is so easy to control, because he's clearly not able to understand what his role is, what he's doing. I do think half the time that he doesn't know where he is at. I thought that during the State of the Union address, he was walking around aimlessly, had a very big look on his face. Also, at the end of this debate where he was with his wife, she had the microphone, was in control. It was almost as if he didn't know he just was engaged in a presidential debate. So he's somebody that's easy to control, whereas the former President Trump is not. He's quite unpredictable. However, there's an argument to be made that he still made a lot of decisions that were very establishment, especially with regard to COVID, to his approving of Operation Warp Speed, and also his surrounding himself with people who are the establishment, like Mike Pompeo and others. So this does bring up deeper questions as to who is really running the United States, and does voting and do these elections really lead to meaningful change?
Yeah, and you beautiful segue, because I want to do a deeper dive into exactly that. On American Independence Day, is America really independent? And who is running America? What are your views, Basil?
What an interesting question. How long have we got? There are books written about it. You know, it's just over 20 years ago that the term deep state first came into the lexicon, courtesy of the very distinguished Canadian academic Peter Dale Scott, when referring to initially the Kennedy assassination and then subsequent events such as the Iraq War. And it's a combination of permanent Washington and the national security state, which doesn't change when the administration changes. And just like the civil service in Britain, often has its own ideas about the way the country should be run. In the case of the CIA, it really has become, as John F. Kennedy feared and then discovered to his enormous cost, that the CIA in particular is out of control when it comes to, for example, dictating foreign policy. It's become a rogue organization. And most importantly, congressional lawmakers are afraid of it. Tucker Carlson has been doing some brilliant revelatory work talking to members of Congress in recent months about how they're not allowed, even in the intelligence oversight committees, to really dig the dirt on what's going on with the various alphabet agencies, CIA, National Security Agency, etc. More and more of them, it seems, Department of Homeland Security, the whole surveillance and foreign policy apparatus that restrains a president. Remember, Trump wanted to pull troops out of Syria and was told, no, you can't do that, you know. And of course, most recently, Tucker discovered from Thomas Massey that every member of Congress has an AIPAC handler as well, the America-Israel Public Affairs Committee, telling them exactly what to say, do, and think, and vote about Israel. So, of course, on top of that, you've also got these interlocking organizations, the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg Group, which is transatlantic group, so on and so forth. And they all influence the same global elite. I mean, I think we are allowed to talk about the existence of a global elite without necessarily being able to name every single member of it. And that's where policy comes from, ultimately. It's a sort of groupthink, which over the last 20 years or so has been increasingly warmongering, increasingly negative, increasingly disrespectful of the wishes of the American people who've seen their living standards decline. So, whether or not we get a new broom in the White House in January of next year, Trump promised to drain the swamp, for 8 years ago, whatever it was, and then did quite the opposite by employing people like Mike Pompeo and the repulsive John Bolton, amongst others. So once you get into that swamp, you get mired in it. It's like quicksand. You can't get out, Andrew.
Yeah. Taylor.
Yes, all interesting points from Basil. I forgot about the John Bolton appointment. A good person to mention, another deep state affiliate. I think when we're having discussions about United States sovereignty, we also have to look at its monetary sovereignty. And this in and of itself could be, a whole other episode. But monetary sovereignty would mean that the government itself, I would say, or part of that would mean that the government itself would be able to print or issue state currency, and it cannot do so. And Basil, you mentioned JFK, and there's many scholars who have said that the United States had lost its sovereignty to, say, its own intelligence agencies with the assassination of JFK. And to not get too speculative here, I just want to point out, and many of the viewers may already be aware, but JFK took some made some interesting decisions near the end of his presidency and his life, where he authorized the issuance of several $1 billion worth of United States notes that represent state money creation. This was without the input and also in direct competition with the privately owned Fed. So essentially what he did was that he challenged the powers that be by printing these United States notes, circumventing the privately owned Federal Reserve. He also fired, I think, 3 top CIA officials. This happened around, I want to say, the spring, early summer of 1963, and he unfortunately was assassinated in November of that year. And then I also want to make note as well that if you go to, just earlier today, I checked, if you go to the Secret Service's website, if you look at their mission is to, and I'm reading exactly what's up there, they have an integrated mission to for the protection of the financial investigations, to ensure the security of the United States, its protectees, key locations of national significance. It says that, quote, we also protect the integrity of our currency and investigate crimes against the U.S. financial system. It's also worth noting that at this time, there were changes being made to the U.S. monetary system. The U.S. was moving away from the gold and silver standards at this time. So many scholars will point to this time in history in the early 60s with the assassination of JFK that we were no longer really a sovereign country, but we were ruled by, I guess, or those who were in positions of power were under the control of this deep state or the intelligence services. Again, that's very much scratching the surface on this issue. There's a lot more to it, but it's very relevant today on American Independence Day and when we're talking about our upcoming elections.
No, it's worth remembering that, according to the Constitution, the government is supposed to be of the people, by the people, for the people. Yes. And yet it's morphed now into a sort of independent mega organization, all of its own, one of the biggest employers in the world. But also, if you can, permanently occupy key positions in the government, then regardless of elections taking place, you can control policy. And so we've got a very interesting dichotomy where it really is no longer the government is no longer the property of the people, but rather the other way round. The people are regarded as the property of the government. And that's a very dangerous thing.
Yeah, I know you make an excellent point. Play with me just for a moment and suppose that the 25th Amendment is invoked and Biden steps down and Kamala takes over in the lead up as president. And I do suggest that the media, just as we predicted beforehand, I do suggest that 25th Amendment is going to be all over the news fairly soon. Suppose that happens, what would a Kamala Harris presidency look like? Taylor?
No, that's interesting. I know that. Well, why don't you go with your quick answer?
Short, very short.
You reckon November the 5th, that would be it?
Yeah, her numbers are no little better than Biden's.
Right, interesting. Any further thoughts?
I was also going to say. Yes, I was also just going to point out she's very unlikable. During the previous election in 2020, when she was running during the primary phase of the elections in 2020, when she was actually running against Joe Biden, I mean, she was extremely unlikable, was polling very low. She was chosen as his running mate, which I remember being somewhat surprised about that beyond the identity politics issue, just because she was such an unlikable person. But I do think people are quite motivated just to vote for somebody other than Trump. But I have a hard time seeing her motivating independents or even some Republicans to vote for her.
Yeah, no, very, very, very.
Yeah, I mean,
we'll see how that plays out. Yes, Basil, go for it.
Well, there is still the wild card of Robert Kennedy. You know, some people are saying that he could be rehabilitated in the Democratic Party. I can't see that happening, really. As for Harris, yeah, as Taylor says, she was spectacularly unpopular when running previously in the primaries, and she was eviscerated by Tulsi Gabbard in one televised debate and dropped out immediately afterwards, which made her a very surprising pick, because normally when looking for a running mate, candidates like to choose somebody who's got some sort of constituency or support base of their own, and Harris has none. And therefore, her name is being talked about. Apparently, you know, Karine Jean-Pierre said only yesterday, she referred to Harris as President Harris at one point, whether it was a slip of the tongue or deliberate. She is being talked about in the way that Andrew says, that the 25th Amendment, which we all know now what it is, if Biden steps down and she becomes president before the election, rather than simply being the candidate on November the 5th, well, you know, they're saying that could, you know, that she's the most likely single runner at the moment, put it that way.
No, I think that's also worth a flutter. We've had a lot of flutters here in the UK with people on insider betting. Well, we break the news here, and not only do we break it, we also help drive it here on the Muckrakers. People are maybe a bit confused about the role of the president and this sort of thing, about who actually has the power and whether the president has any power at all. Is that anything you can shed light on, Taylor, in the last couple of minutes left to us?
Yeah, we'll just leave with a few thoughts here and point to specific things that have happened over the past few months. So this, again, goes back to the overall question about U.S. sovereignty. And if you look at various connections that people in positions of power in the United States have, many of them are dual citizens with Israel. And you also saw recently, just a few months ago, I want to say this was in April, or around that time, the U.S. House passed an Anti-Semitism Awareness Act. Many representatives and legal experts who were against this act said it was a clear violation of the First Amendment. But the point here is that it seeks to impose serious repercussions for speech that is deemed critical of the state of Israel and Israeli government policy. This is the United States of America passed this act. And they're seeking, I think perhaps even one day they would go as far as to seek to criminalize speech that is critical of a foreign government. And again, if you look at the policy of the Middle East, in the continuation of funding the genocide in the Middle East, it does raise questions as to who do these leaders really hold an allegiance to? Is it the American people in the United States, or is it the state of Israel? And I wanted to point to that specific piece of legislation to kind of support some of these questions or some of these claims that some of those in positions of leadership do not have the best interests of the United States. And of course, this is just scratching the surface again, and there's far more to it, but just an important point for people to be aware of. A whole point of our government in the United States is to be able to criticize our own government and others as well.
A fascinating and illuminating discussion, as always. Tomorrow, we're going to be doing a deep dive a bit more into 9/11. We'll also have a quick look at what might have happened. I predict there'll be a few upsets overnight here in the UK, but STARMERGEDDON, I think, is almost certainly on the cards. Do join us tomorrow for the Muckrakers, same time, same place. But in the meantime, Basil, Taylor, always a pleasure. And do look out for that 25th Amendment. We will drive the narrative here on the Muckrakers. I'll see you tomorrow.